Continuing on in my read through of the Bible, we now come to the book of 1 Kings. This is a continuation of the historical saga of the Old Testament. It picks up with the death of King David, goes all the way through the reign of King Solomon. Then it goes into the divided kingdom as Israel and Judah split into two separate kingdoms. It chronicles a number of kings in both Israel and Judah, and ends up with what's called the Elijah cycle, where we talk about all the adventures of the prophet Elijah and the wicked King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. And then 1 Kings ends with the death of King Ahab. And then we go into 2 Kings. Now, as I mentioned in my review of 1 and 2 Samuel, the 1 Kings, 2 Kings thing is not in the original manuscript. We don't have the original manuscript, but it's not in the original. That was introduced in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. In the original Hebrew, it's just all one volume. But I'm going to follow Protestant Christian tradition here and treat this as 1 and 2 Kings because there's so much to talk about just in 1 Kings. I don't need to cover 2 Kings as well in the same video. So this video is only going to be focused on 1 Kings. And there is a lot to talk about. In fact, there's so much to talk about here that I anticipate I'm going to ramble on for probably an hour, once again, as I usually do. No promises on that, but that's usually the way these things go. And then perhaps at about the hour mark, my camera will automatically shut off when my memory card gets full. That's happened before with some of these videos. So if this video abruptly comes to an end, that's why. But I'm just going to talk about things that interest me until I've either the memory gets full or I've exhausted everything that interests me. All right, so we start off with the last days of King David and the continuation of the succession narrative. Now, in my opinion, this really should have been part of 2 Samuel because the succession narrative is one of the main themes of 2 Samuel. And this makes it a little bit awkward for a reviewer like me to pick up with the succession story for just 2 chapters before moving on to the other theme altogether, which is King Solomon. But here we are, the narrative for 2 chapters. Now, in my review of 1 and 2 Samuel, I mentioned the historical debate or the historical controversy about whether or not King David was a real historical figure. There's plenty of evidence pointing to that he wasn't, but there's some interesting arguments saying that he was, and arguments that he was a historical figure or may have been a historical figure is the account of his reign doesn't seem to be mythological. No, that's not the word. Mythological. The account of his reign seems to be what we'd expect from a historical account of something, not a legend. And if we continue that, then his last days in the succession crisis doesn't seem like something you would want to invent if you're creating a mythology. This sounds like this might be real history, although I don't know. So he's an old man. He can't keep warm at night. So they get a beautiful girl to lie in bed with him. And I don't know why, but the Bible feels it's important that we know that this girl is of great beauty who is lying with the king. So she lies on her breast every night to keep him warm. But he had no intercourse with her. So, I guess this is maybe a reminder that old age spares no one. So here's King David, who's been through so many adventures, and who's done so many amazing things and some not so amazing things, just reduced to an old man who they've got to get a young girl of great beauty to sleep with him just to keep him warm. Um, and because David, I guess, is old and possibly going a bit senile, they start intriguing behind his back. One son, how do you pronounce this? Adonijah, wants to proclaim himself king, whereas Nathan and Bathsheba are conspiring around Solomon. So Solomon ends up becoming nominated king at David's nomination, and the others are initially pardoned by Solomon, but then later killed on one pretext or another. Which again sounds like that might be real history, right? These are how these things work. King Solomon says, "No, no, no! I, in my great mercy, am going to pardon you." But then later he finds pretexts for doing away with them. Now the text is slightly biased in King Solomon's favor, but I can't help but feel sorry for Adonijah and the other guys. I mean, there's really no evidence here, at least in the beginning, that Solomon is good and Adonijah is bad. It's just they're both vying to become king. Adonijah tries to just declare himself king, and he assumes he's going to become king just because he was the oldest, which is something he will mention later. All Israel expected me to be king, but the crown eluded me and fell to my brother. Yes, Solomon initially punishes them, but the pretext to kill Adonijah is when Adonijah asks for the hand in marriage of the beautiful girl who was sleeping with David, but not having intercourse with David. Solomon, when he hears this request, gets so infuriated, he immediately orders Adonijah to be killed. Now, the Jerusalem Bible here defends this decision by saying to take the wife of a dead or deposed king gave a title to succession. So essentially, they say Adonijah was plotting to become king again. Although, like a lot of things, it's not at all clear in the text what his true motives were. Maybe he was just really in love with her. And was she the wife of King David? Well, no, she was just a girl of great beauty who was sleeping with him to keep him warm. And the text goes out of its way to say that they did not have intercourse. So, I don't know. But the other people who were supporting Adonijah end up getting killed as well. Joab really gets killed essentially for no reason. He just hears Adonijah has been killed, thinks he's next, and sure enough, he is next. King Solomon is going to have him killed, even after he had been pardoned the first time. But King Solomon is just doing what his father ordered him to. So on David's deathbed, he said, "You know what Joab, son of Zeruiah, did to me, and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner, son of Ner, and Amasa, son of Jether, how he murdered them, how in the time of peace he took vengeance for blood shed in war. So you will be wise not to let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace." Sheol is the underworld in the Hebrew religion. This is before the concept of heaven has been introduced. Heaven and hell have been introduced. Now, this is interesting. I mean, one thing that's interesting is the other person that Joab had killed against the explicit orders of David was David's son Absalom. And this does not get mentioned here, although you can't help but wonder if this was also on David's mind. But yeah, this is the end of Joab, who was a very interesting figure throughout First and Second Samuel. Maybe not always a good figure, but a figure I thought was very interesting. And then the death of Shimei. Now, Shimei is also somebody who David suggests Solomon kill. He called on a terrible curse on me the day I left from Mahanaim. Shimei is a Benjamite, and the Jerusalem Bible theorizes that perhaps part of Shimei's hostility to David is Benjamin was the tribe of Saul. The house of David, of course, took away the kingship from the house of Saul. So there's a resentment from the tribe of Benjamin. Remember that might be coming up a little bit later when we talk about the divided kingdom. But in 2 Samuel, David had explicitly said to Shimei that he was forgiven when Shimei had asked for forgiveness. He said, I will never kill you. But there's a loophole in that his son Solomon will kill him. Now, Solomon sets up a little bit of a trap for Shimei, where Shimei is prevented from leaving Jerusalem. But when he needs to leave Jerusalem to go after his slaves, then that's a pretext for killing him. And then that all out of the way, we are into the next part, which is Solomon in all his glory. Now, I had forgotten just how much space the reign of Solomon takes up. It goes all the way from 1 Kings 3. I mean, even earlier, if you count the Solomon being anointed in 1 Kings 1 and 2. But the reign of Solomon from 1 Kings 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, all the way, to 1 Kings 11. Although, as the subheadings on this Bible indicate, there are different stages to the story. So there's Solomon the sage. Now, I was just talking earlier that people often say that the story of King David might be historical because it feels historical. Certainly, the reign of Solomon the sage does not feel historical to me. This sounds like myth. The myth of the wise king, just like Numa, the legendary king of Rome, or Solon, the legendary lawgiver of Athens, right? There are all these legendary wise kings who are responsible for establishing all these things. And it talks about how Solomon is wise and how he knows everything and how he impresses everyone. The famous story about the two women with one live child and one dead child. And you know this story, right? Solomon says, cut the living child in two. This is how we find out who the true mother is. So this just sounds like, I mean, who knows? Maybe there was a real historical Solomon who got mythologized later over time. But this sounds like it's mainly mythology to me. And then when the Queen of Sheba eventually goes to meet him, and she is so impressed by how much he knows and how rich his kingdom is and how he knows every question she could possibly ask him. Again, that just sounds like later mythologizing / propaganda. But we have, Solomon, who's famous for his wisdom and also his buildings. So he builds the temple and the temple building and the Holy of Holies. And it goes through and describes all the wonderful things he has in his temple. So he made 10 stands of bronze. Each stand was 4 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, and 3 high. They were designed as followed. They had an undercarriage and cross pieces to the undercarriage. On the crosspiece of the undercarriage were lions and bulls and cherubs, and it just goes on describing all the wonderful statues that he had made. Now, I have always had trouble visualizing these descriptions. Even when I was a kid, I had trouble visualizing them and reading them again now. I'm finding the temptation to just let my eyes glaze over and get lost a little bit here, saying, okay, there were some wonderful things made, but I can't really visualize them. I guess this is where it would be nice to have a illustrated Bible, which would have these illustrations. And a number of them do, right? Maybe I'm not the only one who has trouble visualizing them. But there is... I complained about this in the book of Exodus when there was a lot of descriptions of the tabernacle. Here we have a lot of descriptions of just the building and what it looked like and how it was built and what was inside and what was outside, and Solomon's palace as well. Now, I've mentioned this in a couple different videos before. When I was a young Christian, I always used to question a little bit why God bothered with some of these details. Like, do I really need to know about the different basins and wheeled stands in the temple? It's not interesting to me. I can't see how this is useful for my salvation or for making me a better Christian. But it's in here. It's in here. It's somewhat ironic that this is all cataloged in such detail because it's not going to last a generation. As Solomon dies, we're going to jump ahead here. It's going, in the reign of his first son, just one ruler after Solomon, it's going to be all pillaged by the king of Egypt, Shishak, who's going to, he took everything, including all the golden shears that Solomon had made. He took all the treasures from the temple and the treasures from the royal palace. So, it's nice that we had that detailed description of them, and then they are all gone. But I guess the detailed description of them was to illustrate how magnificent the golden age of Solomon was when he was in his territory. When he was in his glory. How magnificent the golden age of Solomon was when he was at the height of his glory. While we're here, this is maybe an interesting place to point out that this is one of the key plot points of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. So Shishak, the king of Egypt, plunders the temple and then goes back to Egypt. And this is why in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Nazis are trying, or Indiana Jones is competing against the Nazis, but they're both trying to find the Ark of the Covenant in Egypt, because this verse here seems to indicate that perhaps the Ark was covered and taken back to Egypt. Now, that's nothing you will hear in Sunday school. It's never mentioned in the Bible that the Ark of the Covenant was taken back to Egypt. But also, correct me if I'm wrong, the Ark of the Covenant is not mentioned again, right? So there's a big deal made about how the Ark of the Covenant is brought into Solomon's temple. That's over here. Ark brought to the temple. So the final resting place of the Ark is at last in Solomon's temple. But then we never hear about the Ark again. When the Babylonians or the Persians come, where has the Ark gone? It's just never mentioned. Or am I forgetting something? Let me know in the comments if I'm forgetting a later mention of the Ark of the Covenant. But I think the fact that it's just never mentioned again is where that theory comes from, that ended up getting looted by Shishak, the king of Egypt, when he sacked Jerusalem. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So there's Solomon the builder. Then there's Solomon the trader. This is when the Queen of Sheba story comes in. All of Solomon's wealth and his chariots. and then his decline. So, yeah, there are a number of cases in the Bible where characters suddenly change without any explanation. And it's frustrating when you're reading the Bible, but as I've said in previous videos, I think the way to view this as this is just the bare bones of a plot which somebody else can later explore and make a proper story with. And I'm sure these stories exist out there somewhere. I mean, I don't know. I've not seen them, but they must exist out there somewhere, right? Some historical fiction or religious fiction attempting to explain what happened to Solomon, how he went from such a loyal follower of Yahweh, just all of a sudden at the end of his reign, turning against Yahweh. Now, of course, we are given somewhat of an explanation. It is blamed on his wives, the foreign women. But, when Solomon grew old, his wives swayed his heart to other gods. Maybe the implication is as he's growing old, he's getting weak and senile. I don't know. Even if we blame this on his wives, it still seems like a rather about face for somebody who had been so faithful to Yahweh up until now. Surely he could have stood up to his wives. And then Solomon ends up just being one of the bad kings for the last part of his reign, giving over to idolatry. Yahweh raised up an enemy against Solomon. Now, the Jerusalem Bible has an interesting little footnote here. So it says, Solomon's marriages with foreign wives were made for political reasons, and the pagan gods were set up for his wives for visiting traders. The writer interprets the situation in the spirit and language of Deuteronomy. So in other words, the writer of 1 Kings is blaming Solomon's lack of faith in Yahweh as setting up these altars to foreign gods. The editors of the Jerusalem Bible are saying in their footnotes, actually it wasn't a lack of faith, he's just doing a smart political thing. Well, he's doing a political thing, at least, to make the traders happy. It's an interesting little... I always find these footnotes in the Jerusalem Bible to be interesting. I've been puzzling a little bit over what their ideological basis is as I've been reading through this Jerusalem Bible, and I think I've come to the conclusion that for the most part, the editors of the Jerusalem Bible are operating from the assumption that the historical narrative is true. They seem to be operating from the assumption that it's all true, at least basically true, but that the biblical writers are telling it from a biased perspective. Which I think that's their ideological background or basis after kind of having read through all their notes for all these books. Somebody correct me if you know anything more about the ideological basis for the Jerusalem Bible. But yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I always enjoyed their footnotes here. Anyways, because of that, we get the revolt of Jeroboam. And then we get the political and religious schism. So Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam succeeds him. Now, there are a number of cases in the Bible, or in maybe the 1st and 2nd Kings especially, where there are characters alive at the same time who have very similar names to each other, which always used to confuse me back in my young Sunday school days. We'll maybe get to a few more of those examples later, but here's a classic example. We've got Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Was it just historical coincidence if these were historical figures that they both have a Obom name, or I don't know. But anyways, some very similar sounding names, but Jeroboam and Rehoboam. All right, so King Solomon, throughout his reign, used a lot of forced labor. And that was something that was noted in the Bible even during the sections on King Solomon, even before King Solomon went bad. Forced labor for King Solomon's building program. So Solomon's dead now, and his son Rehoboam is king, and the people assemble and say, "Okay, you're going to give us a break, right? Your father gave us a heavy burden to bear. Lighten your father's harsh tyranny now, and the weight of the burden he laid on us, and we will serve you." So Rehoboam tells him to go away, and he's going to come back with an answer. He consults with the elders, and the elders say, "Humor them, treat them fairly, and they will be your servants forever," which is very good advice. But he doesn't listen to the good advice. He goes to the young men who he had grown up with, and he asks them for advice. And they replied, "Give this answer to these people who have said, 'Your father gave us a heavy burden to bear.' You must lighten it for us. Say this to them: 'My little finger is thicker than my father's loins. So then, my father made you bear a heavy burden. I will make it heavier still. My father beat you with whips. I am going to beat you with loaded scourges.'" I believe I forgot to look this up before I filmed the video, but if memory serves, the NIV translation of this was, "I will whip you with scorpions," or "I will whip you with snakes," or something like that. Not very good advice. Rehoboam goes back and says this to the people, and they walk away. They said, "What share have we in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse." And then they leave and form another kingdom, and that is the beginning of the divided monarchy. Now, I'll come back to that, but this strikes me as something that sounds almost historical. And I've been listening to Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcasts past couple of years and reviewing it as I go on this YouTube channel. And I'm always struck by, Mike Duncan makes a point of emphasizing this as well. Before each revolution, there is a monarch who listens to some terrible advice from his advisors, where if he would just be a little bit flexible and just give in to the people suffering a little bit, he could avoid a revolution. But in all these cases, in all the cases where a revolution does break out, the monarch ends up listening to the hardliners who said, no, be firm, don't give in, stand the ground, don't show any weakness, and then provokes a revolution where they didn't have to. And I was just, this story of Rehoboam listening to bad advice and completely provoking a revolution where he didn't have to, where if he had just gave a soft answer, he could have saved his whole kingdom. But he didn't. And now we are in the divided kingdom. Now, yes, the divided kingdom here is a little bit tricky, and this is something that has confused me ever since I was a kid. Is what exactly are the 12 tribes of Israel? So if you remember back to Genesis, the 12 tribes of Israel were the 12 sons of Jacob, who was also known as Israel. So he had 12 sons. Each one of those sons would go on to become a tribe. And fair enough, Viola, we have the 12 tribes of Israel. But, um, sorry, I'm playing around with the map here. But Joseph had two sons who were also made tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, I believe, if I remember them correctly. So Joseph, there's no tribe of Joseph. There's just the tribe of Manasseh, and there's a tribe of Ephraim. So Joseph gets a double inheritance because his two sons become tribes. Okay, so now that's 13 tribes. Except, I think what's going on here is the tribe of Levi doesn't get counted because they don't get any land apportioned to them. So it says 12 tribes of Israel. There are actually 13 tribes, but the tribe of Levi doesn't have any land. Also, the Manasseh is divided into two halves. There's a half tribe of Manasseh here on the other side of the Jordan River. And in the book of Joshua and Judges, it sounded like these were two separate entities. But I'm going to let that go for now because I don't think that comes up again in the biblical narrative. I could be wrong, but we'll just go back to Manasseh being one tribe. Okay, so the where is it? Even before Solomon dies, Jeroboam is given a prophecy that he is going to take 10 tribes from Solomon's hand. So I'm going to tear the kingdom from Solomon's hand. It's actually, Solomon actually dies with the full kingdom, but we're talking about Solomon's son. And give 10 tribes to you. He shall keep one tribe for the sake of my servant David. Now the footnote says here, Judah, the one tribe left to Solomon, had absorbed the 12th tribe, Simeon. So, and we can see this on the map here. Judah completely surrounds Simeon. Okay, so I guess now we're down to 11 tribes. Yeah. 11 tribes. 10 tribes will go to Israel, and then one tribe for the servant David. So Judah and also Simeon has been absorbed by Judah. Now, the tricky thing is Benjamin, right? So I remember learning at my school, and I went to when I was growing up, I went to a Christian school, and I also went to regular Sunday school at a church which was not affiliated with my school. So sometimes I would hear one thing at my Christian school and one thing at my Sunday school, and I would argue with either my Christian school teachers or my Sunday school teachers. At my Christian school, I learned that Benjamin and Judah together formed the kingdom of Judah. Now, in Sunday school, actually, this is in my confirmation class at my church, the confirmation teacher said that Benjamin was actually caught in the middle, neither part of Judah nor part of Israel. And I disagreed with this. I said, no. Benjamin was part of Judah. I learned that at school. And he said, no. And I looked through my Bible, and I had a copy of the Student Bible, if anyone remembers that, the NIV version. And I found somewhere, not in the biblical text itself, but in one of the commentary accompanying the biblical text in the Student Bible, a place where it said Judah was composed of the tribes of Benjamin and Judah together. And I pointed that out to him, and I made a big deal of it and corrected him. And he said, okay, I'm sorry, guys. Joel was right. And he showed everybody. This was This was one of those moments I was very proud of myself for years afterwards. I corrected the teacher. And it's not until relatively recently in my life that I realized what a little shit I was. Not something to be proud of, but being so argumentative in class, and then so yeah, when you get old, you look back on your youth with a lot of embarrassment, and that's a embarrassing moment of mine, even though I was quite proud of it at the time. Anyways, uh, so what's going on with the tribe of Judah? Well, it says that Solomon only gets left one tribe, but then when we get to the political schism here, Rehoboam, son of Solomon, goes to the tribe, the whole house of Judah, and to Benjamin, and to the rest of the people. So earlier in the text, it said that Judah was only getting one tribe. Now it says that Rehoboam went back to Jerusalem and mustered the whole house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. Now, what makes this a little bit funny is what I was alluding to before when I was talking about, what was his name? Shimei. All throughout 2 Samuel, we get the impression that Judah is loyal to David, but a lot of the Benjamites are more loyal to the house of Saul. And there are people in Benjamin who resent the house of David for taking the kingdom away from Saul. And that the tribe of Benjamin, would be liable to cause trouble during the reign of David. Now the tribe of Benjamin is going with the tribe of Judah, I guess. I don't know. I guess I'll just appeal to the audience here. If anybody knows exactly what's going on with the tribe of Benjamin, was it part of the kingdom of Judah? Was it actually stuck in the middle? Was it part of Israel? And what's going on when the prophecy is that I will tear 10 tribes from Solomon's hand, and I will leave him one? But it looks like it's actually 3, right? It's Judah, Simeon. I guess Simeon doesn't exist anymore, maybe. And Benjamin is part of that kingdom. Anyways, I've wasted far too much time talking about that. What happens here is Rehoboam provokes a revolution, and then the 10 or 9, depending on you count them, northern tribes go over to Jeroboam. And I'm not quite sure what the status of Levi is at this point. I guess the Levites are maybe scattered throughout both kingdoms. And then we have 2 separate kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. And this is going to be the status quo all the way through the rest of 1 Kings and 2 Kings until both kingdoms are destroyed. Now we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit because this isn't going to happen until 2 Kings. But the Assyrians are going to destroy the kingdom of Israel, and the Babylonians are going to destroy the kingdom of Judah. Now, again, this okay, well, let me back up here a little bit. What follows throughout the rest of 1st and 2nd Kings is a chronicle of the reigns of the kings of Israel and Judah, with the stories of the prophets interspersed with them. And sometimes when we get to a major prophet like Elijah, then the Elijah story is actually going to take over the narrative for several chapters before we get back to the chronicles of the kings of Israel and Judah. But by and large, it's a chronicle of the reigns of the kings of Israel and Judah, which is why these books are named Kings. The kings are given an evaluation about whether they're good or whether they're bad. Uh, and I remember studying this during my school days at my Christian school. We actually, as we were studying this book, we kept a chart in the classroom, which kings were good, which kings were bad, and I think there was like a smiley face for the good ones and a frowny face for the bad ones, and we were keeping track of it. And then at the end of the chart, once we had gotten through all the kings, we realized that the kings of Judah had some good kings and some bad kings. It varies. The kings of Israel, every single one of them was bad. There was not a single one that was faithful to Yahweh. There are a few that started out good, but they always ended up forsaking Yahweh by the end of their reign. Now, there's a couple disclaimers I need to make about this framework. The first disclaimer is that when we talk about the kings being good or bad, we're using the framework of the writers of the Bible, which is if they are faithful to Yahweh, they're good. If they are worshiping other gods, they are bad. And the normal morality doesn't really enter into it all that much. So murder, violence, killing, it's not, killing and violence is not good or bad per se in this framework. If you are killing someone for Yahweh, it's good. If you are killing somebody and it's not for Yahweh, it's bad. And so like it's you know, if you grew up Christian like I did, it might take some work to kind of disengage yourself from the framework and realize that maybe from a strictly historical lens, what we're being told about good or bad is not really real here. Now, there's a classic example here. I'm jumping ahead, but Elijah and Obadiah. Obadiah is faithful to Yahweh because Ahab is, or I guess Jezebel is the one who gets the blame here. Jezebel is trying to kill the prophets of Yahweh. Yes, so Jezebel was butchering the prophets of Yahweh. Obadiah took 100 and hid them 50 at a time in a cave. So according to the polemic we're set up here, this is evil Jezebel. Evil. She's killing the prophets of Yahweh. But turn one page, and then the prophets of Baal, Elijah says, "Seize the prophets of Baal, do not let them escape." They seized them, and Elijah took them down to the Wadi Kishon and slaughtered them there. So good Elijah. He's killing the prophets of Baal. So you see, like the normal morality, like thou shalt not kill or anything like that's completely irrelevant here for our evaluation of these kings or the I guess the characters in this historical framework in general. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind, I guess, is as Christine Hayes puts it in her lectures on the Old Testament from Yale Open University, these sources have a pro-Southern bias. So they were compiled by the surviving kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom of Israel, as we will see when we get to 2 Kings, is completely destroyed in those 10 tribes, or 9 tribes, depending on how you count them, are never heard from again. And so then it's the kingdom of Judah that survives the Babylonian exile and will write this historical narrative. As well as, apparently there's something about during the religious conflicts up in the northern kingdom, the refugees heading south are the partisans of Yahweh. So and these are where the stories about Elijah kind of are coming from, I guess, is uh, Yahweh partisans who are fleeing down to the kingdom of Judah during the religious conflicts in the northern kingdom, and they're talking about how bad the land that they had to flee from is, just like refugees will typically do when they escape from a political conflict or a religious conflict in this case, political and religious, I guess. Um, so that's what's going on here, and what we will see then is, well, like I just said, the kings of Judah, some of them are good, some of them are bad. And remember, good and bad meaning as defined in this framework, faithful to Yahweh or not faithful to Yahweh. But the kings of Israel, every single one of them is not faithful to Yahweh. Now, some of these guys are actually attributed to by outside historical sources. I'm going off what I learned from Robin Lane Fox in his book, The Unauthorized Version, Truth and Fiction in the Bible. But I also was looking this up on Wikipedia just before filming, and Wikipedia backs this up as well. So Omri, king of Israel, who's going to establish the house of Omri, which Ahab is going to be his direct descendant. We have archaeological evidence for him, or at least we have archaeological evidence for the house of Omri. Not the reign of Omri himself, but we've got references to the house of Omri. I believe it's in Assyrian records. And Jehu, another king of Israel, who is mentioned briefly in 1 Kings, but he's not going to really come into the scene until 2 Kings. So we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but he is also attested to in outside archaeological sources. Again, I think it's Assyrian tablets, if I'm remembering correctly. So we are now moving into the section of the biblical narrative where at least some of this is definitely historical. And it doesn't mean like all the miracles that are actually occurred or anything like that. But some of these kings were actually historical figures. Now, we don't have evidence for all of them, but they could be historical. I mean, we know some of them are historical, so the rest of them could be historical. I believe Robin Lane Fox says that we've got evidence that some stuff is being moved around to support the polemic. So some of the victories are being given to the good kings and some of the defeats are given to the bad kings. I don't remember the details of that. You'll have to check his book. But okay, so some of these guys are definitely historical. Maybe some of the stuff is being moved around, but we are now definitely in the historical part of the biblical narrative for the first time. As we talked about before, King David was maybe historical, but we don't really have any hard evidence for that. Everything before King David was myth and legend. But now we have moved forward in time enough that we are in the historical period. And this is interesting. If you like ancient history like I do, there's a lot of talking about who worshipped the false gods and who didn't worship the false gods, and that's not so interesting. But in Israel especially, the various usurping and the conniving for the throne of Israel gets interesting. In Judah, David's line is preserved all the way through, and this is because God had made a promise to David. At least that's a biblical explanation for it, that his descendants would sit on the throne forever. So David's line will continue all throughout the history of Judah, but in Israel, there's a lot of kings getting killed by their generals and stuff like that. So, for example, we have the first king of Israel is Jeroboam, and then he dies, and his son Nadab takes the throne. But then Nadab is murdered by Baasha. So Baasha, son of Ahijah of the house of Issachar, plotted against him and murdered him at Gibbethon. So now Baasha takes the throne, and he wipes out the whole house, not sparing a soul. This is going to be a continuing theme here, which, again, is not implausible when you consider how these things went down historically, right? When somebody becomes king, they wipe out the entire house. So then Baasha is king, and then his son Elah becomes king, but he gets killed by one of his officers, Zimri, who was captain of half of his chariots. But Zimri only lasts for 7 days. So Zimri had killed off Baasha. And again, Zimri destroyed Baasha's entire family. So he wiped out the whole house, which is pretty busy work in 7 days. But let's see. Zimri does not last long either. So as soon as Zimri becomes king, then two generals rise up against him. One is Omri, who we talked about earlier. This is the guy whose house is historically attested to. Now, so Omri lays a siege to him. Zimri sees that the town is captured, so he goes into the royal palace and then burns himself to death, I guess, by setting his royal palace on fire. This was because of the sin he committed by doing what is displeasing to Yahweh, by copying the example of Jeroboam and the sin into which he led Israel. Remember, all of these kings of Israel, they're bad because they lead their people into false gods and false idols. But you wonder a little bit, Zimri was only king for 7 days, right? And during those 7 days, he appears to have been quite busy butchering Baasha's entire family. Now, the fact that he butchered Baasha's entire family is not what gets him into trouble with God. And in fact, later, Yahweh is going to sanction this kind of thing. Like when Jehu is ordered to wipe out Ahab's entire family. That's going to be coming up in 2 Kings. So again, the normal morality doesn't enter into this. The fact that he butchered the entire family is not the bad thing. The fact that he had copied the example and led them into sin, presumably this is talking about the false gods, but how much time did he have to establish a cult of false gods just in 7 days? Anyways, moving on. And then Omri is king. It looks like there was a little bit of power struggle between Omri and the other general. But Omri's faction was stronger. Omri is king. And then we get to King Ahab. Now, King Ahab is one of those names which is very recognizable, I think. I think it's recognizable even to people who've not read the Bible or are not familiar with the Bible, right? The bad King Ahab. It's interesting, though, rereading this. Ahab does not really come out as being all that evil. He worships false gods. So again, according to the polemic, according to the framework of this narrative, that is enough to make him evil. But he himself seems to be a very meek and mild guy. He can't stand up for himself. He gets bullied around by his wife. He gets bullied around by the people around him. He gets condemned by God for a number of reasons. Yeah, there are multiple reasons why he gets condemned, which in and of itself, I guess, is a little bit suspect, right? I mean, how many times does he have to lose God's favor before it sticks? But one of the reasons he gets condemned is for showing mercy to another king. So he gets condemned for just being too nice of a king. Now, he does, there is the Naboth vineyard part where he's responsible for the murder of Naboth. But even then, it's his wife that does it. Ahab just sits around in his house moping, and it's his wife Jezebel that arranges the murder. So yeah, Ahab is interesting. But we get into the Elijah cycle here, where Elijah is going to take center stage here, and excuse me. The Chronicles of the Kings of Israel is being put on hold, where we get into the adventures of Elijah. Now, these are stories that I remember well from Sunday school, but one of the interesting things about rereading this, I noticed, is how little characterization we get with Elijah. And this has been a common theme I've been mentioning throughout with my rereading of the Old Testament narrative. Just, I remember these characters as being like so vivid from the Sunday school lessons or from the kids' versions of the Bible you read or whatever. And interesting just to go back to the original text and just see there is no characterization here at all. So Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As Yahweh lives, the God of Israel whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain these years except at my order." And that's the introduction of Elijah. Like we've not heard of him before. He was not in the text before this. He just all of a sudden appears with that one sentence introduction, and all of a sudden proclaims the drought. I had remembered there being more build up to this or more characterization. And we do get a few of Elijah's adventures, the miracle of the flour and the oil, bringing the widow's son back to life. And then the famous sacrifice on Carmel, where Elijah defeats the prophets of Baal. That's the part I was just alluding to earlier. I'm surprised that the Jerusalem Bible didn't point this out, but one of the things I remember from Sunday school, Elijah is mocking the prophets of Baal because Baal is not responding to their prayers. So call louder, he said, for he is a god. He is preoccupied, or he is busy, or he has gone on a journey. Apparently that he is busy means he's having a bowel movement, like he's relieving himself. And this is something it's translated he is busy as well in the NIV, but I remember actually more than one Sunday school teacher making a point of saying that actually that he is busy means relieving himself. But the Jerusalem Bible also translates that as he is busy. I hope actually, I hope I'm not spreading urban legends here. I haven't actually read the original Hebrew myself, but that's just what I've heard from a couple different Sunday school teachers. That's the original translation of that. Anyways, just a little scatological humor going on there. Moving on, the drought ends. And then we get the call of Elisha. As I was mentioning before, there throughout the historical narrative, there are characters with similar names interacting with each other. Here we have Elijah and Elisha. Although it's interesting, Elisha gets called here, but then Elisha doesn't really do anything. And I'm not sure if Elisha has... once Elijah gets called up to heaven, then Elisha will take over. Elijah is taken up and Elisha succeeds him. This is right at the beginning of 2 Kings. So Elisha gets called to be Elijah's protege here. and you would expect like a series of adventures where Elijah is teaching Elisha, and they're growing together, and Elisha is picking up Elijah's wisdom. But no, this is all we get. Like I said, it's interesting to go back to these the original text and realize just when you come back to the Bible itself, and you forget all the Sunday school stories and all the all the other story books that have been written about this. The actual text gives you very little characterization. Now, we get next to the Aramean Wars, which is a few wars that Ahab fights against the kingdom of Aramean. Aram. Aram is the king, the name of the kingdom. I guess Aramean is the adjective. So we have one here, and then First Kings 22, another war with Aram. So Aram is, let me go over here to my other map. Here, the kingdoms around Israel. Oh, no. Here it is. Kingdom of Aram, also with Damascus here. So that they're over here. And they have the king Ben-Hadad, who is going to be an opponent of Ahab throughout these stories. So they come and they lay siege to Samaria, which is Israel's capital. Ahab attempts actually to make peace with them. So he says, Ben-Hadad says, "First, your gold and silver are mine. You can keep your wives and children." Ahab said, "Yep, that sounds good. We'll hand over all the gold and silver." But then Ben-Hadad says, "No, actually, I want your wives and children as well." So Ahab says, "You can see how clearly this man intends to ruin us." Again, Ahab is coming out as not a wicked king. He's just like a meek king who's getting bullied around by his neighbors. Now, what's interesting about this story is God actually gives the victory to Ahab. Now, this is not the way that these stories are supposed to work, right? The way these stories are supposed to work is when Israel worships false gods, then they get defeated by their enemies. Then when the king repents and returns to God, to Yahweh, then they get the victory against their enemies. But Yahweh actually gives the victory to Ahab. And I guess the idea is that this is going to be a sign to Ahab to show him who is the true God. Although it doesn't work because Ahab still is with his false gods. But a prophet comes, Yahweh, this is just a nameless prophet in this case, it's not Elijah. Yahweh is going to give you the victory. So they give a big victory. And now Ben-Hadad is fleeing, and he comes begging for mercy. And Ahab said, "Is he still alive? He is my brother." And he takes Ben-Hadad and has him get into his chariot with him. So an act of mercy, magnanimity perhaps, by allowing the defeated king to come up in his chariot with King Ahab. But this is something that is going to get him condemned by Yahweh. Yahweh says this: "Since you have let the man escape who is under my ban, your life will pay for this, your people for his people." Now, like I said, what makes that a little bit confusing is Ahab also gets condemned in the very next chapter for also for another incident. So now he is really super in trouble. But Ahab actually repents, and God accepts his repentance, sort of. He's still going to die in battle, and the dogs are still going to lick his blood, which was prophesied somewhere over here. The dogs will lick your blood too. So that's coming up. But I guess the house is not going to be wiped out in his lifetime. I'm not really sure what benefit that does to Ahab. I mean, if he's, well, yeah. I will bring disaster down on his house in the days of his son. So his house is still going to get wiped out, and he's still going to die. But I mean, what's the benefit to Ahab here, huh? I mean, I don't know. The only way I can see this being a mercy is if the original plan was to kill all his sons in front of him and then kill him afterwards, which I think is what happens to the last king of Israel, right? At the end of Second Kings. But if Ahab is going to get killed off anyways, and then all his sons are going to get killed off anyways, I don't know. Moving on. Ahab dies in the campaign against Ramoth Gilead, in which he's with Jehoshaphat. Now, Jehoshaphat is actually one of the good kings of Judah. He is a very good write-up over here. It always used to confuse me in my Sunday school days about why he was palling around with Ahab, because they're portrayed as being very close friends, and I think they seal their alliance with a marriage. Jehoshaphat's son marries Ahab's sister, if I'm remembering right, or maybe Jehoshaphat himself married Ahab's sister. I forget exactly. The house of Jehoshaphat and the house of Ahab become linked together. But they have a joint campaign